Here, in a world where the sun burns cold and the wind blows colder, a visitor has come, but not by herself. These are the words of the trailer of 1992's Fincher follow-up to Ridley Scott's 1979 Alien and James Cameron's 1986 Aliens. Alien 3, a controversial film, a troubled production. Let's talk about it.
I think in cinema, there are so many elements that go into making a film good, and there are an equal number of elements that go into making a film bad. I don't think that David Fincher's Alien 3, if it can even be called David Fincher's Alien 3, we'll get into that, but I'm not sure that this is either a good or a bad film because I feel that it's an incomplete film. I feel that it's a film that strays too far from whatever the intentions were. And a great deal of that falls on studio interference, which is the easiest, that's the easiest finger to point, blame. That's the easiest attitude to have, that the production can stand as this monolith of greed designed simply to maximize profit and limit cost. It's very easy to blame that. But upon watching the film again and watching some of the documentaries on the Alien, some of the documentaries that are included in the Alien quadrilogy, and following the career of director David Fincher, I think you have to not lay an equal amount of blame, but a significant amount of blame on Fincher for, I would argue, a certain level of megalomania, but the ridiculousness of taking on such a big project without a complete script. It's very easy to lay blame on 20th Century Fox, and I think the majority of the blame lays on them. Their desire to get a film into the can, to set up a release date before a film was even written, and then to push a film into, push film across the finishing line in order to make that date. There is a certain level of greed in that, and there's a certain level of artistic integrity that is completely abolished in that kind of an effort. But I can't sit here and say that David Fincher, who has gone on to make classics like Seven, Fight Club, The Social Network, Gone Baby Gone, a number of, not Gone Baby Gone, but
Gone Girl?
Gone Girl. I think it's short-sighted to not give him his just due in the failure of this movie. He was a director who came out of commercials and music videos. He was picked by 20th Century Fox to take this lead, to take this football and, carry it across the finish line. And I think his ego, definitely, and I think you need an ego. I think he definitely he definitely has a healthy dose of ego necessary to shepherd this kind of franchise and bring with it a different attitude, look, and vibe. But I think he's been martyred to a certain degree, and he deserves a fair amount of blame for why this film fails. And this is a film that I greatly admire. This is a film that, as I watch it, I'm overwhelmed by it. But watching it again for this episode, in preparation for this episode, I found myself realizing that what I really loved about this film is the design, the look, the cinematography, the lighting. and the story itself is not as powerful and exciting as I once remembered it to be. I haven't seen this film in 6 or 7 years, and watching it again, and watching the assembly cut,
Right.
which is about a half hour longer than the original theatrical cut, and has significant differences from what I've been told. The birth of the chest burster, the ending, a number of different aspects to it. I think it's a beautiful package. It's a beautifully wrapped gift, but the gift is not all that it's not all that it's made out to be, and that's because there was no script per se. There were a great deal of ideas that came together, and I think they were able to come together and form a coherent movie, because at its base, this is a very simplistic story. This is a monster in the shadows movie, and all that monster has to do is be able to slowly kill off the protagonists. In this case, a colony of prisoners who have found some sort of psychological, emotional, and religious safety or security in understanding themselves. I think there are great performances here. I think everybody really does outstanding work with a script that's just not there. So upon watching this film again, I'm disappointed. But it is a beautiful film to look at, and probably of the four films, probably the best looking of the four. No, not probably, definitely the best looking of the four films. So that being said, this is where I stand with it. What say you, Mr. Chavez?
I disagree with you on certain aspects, but at the same time, I agree with you on others, which is kind of like par for the course.
Yeah.
Um, it's at this point usually that you ask me what's my relationship to the
Yeah.
film, so I'll answer you. It it had been a long last time for me, all as well, and I don't remember having a kind of connection to this film the way I had. If anything, I have more of a connection to the first one.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where I'm kind of like, when you say that the look, that you choose the look of this film over all of the other ones, part of me winces at that, because although I do greatly appreciate this look, I just think they're different.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first one is just Ridley Scott's his production design kind of background and all that stuff.
Sure.
It's a different thing, and I think I have reasons why I think each of these films is different and like where it falls, and I'll get into that later. But I remember feeling that for me, if I had to put this kind of like order, if I had to put the four films in a certain order in terms of like the best to the worst, or the strongest to the weakest, or however you want to split that, I would go 1, 3, 2, 4. That's how I felt. And then there's a part of me that looks at that just, I watched the theatrical and the assembly for this, and there's part of me that still feels that same way, even though this whole film is on some level compromised. I still
Mm-hmm.
feel that I think this is a better film And I think, and the reasons why I disagree with you is because although the script was troubled or troublesome or whatever, I still think that it's the actual plot is stronger for this one than for the second one, because, or at least at the very least, I'll say it's more interesting. The plot, well, in the assembly cut, there's a subplot with one of the characters kind of having this Renfield moment with the alien that isn't in the theatrical cut.
Mm-hmm.
But just the fact that there's a subplot, to me, on the one hand, you could say, I mean, the counter argument to this is like, well, they're just trying to jam more shit in. But I just feel like there's more opportunity for things to happen and things to go wrong for the character, and therefore for different characters to develop and to reach their own or follow through with their own arcs. Then in part two is kind of like run, hide, fight. That's kind of the plot for part two. And part two is fun, and part two is a classic. I think I said that last week. While I think that part two is a classic, I think that part one is a masterpiece. Do I think that this is a masterpiece? Not necessarily. Do I think that this is a classic? Not necessarily. That's another weird aspect of it. I still think that I look at this plot as more interesting and more. I think it's more fulfilling for the characters. If you take the aspect of what you described before as for the first two films is kind of like the 10 little Indians, as you called it. It's just kind of like, it becomes kind of like a Friday the 13th kind of setup where it's like, well, you have this antagonist that's just basically going to kill everyone off. And then there's a final girl. That's pretty much the way that the first two play out. With this aspect of a single betrayer character thrown in. That you get that with the first one, you get that with the second one. Here, that leads to different aspects of character motivation and backstories, which you really don't get, especially with the second one. I think the second one, the characters are just basically tropes. I talked about that.
Yeah.
Here, at least these characters each seem to have their own motivations and their behaviors are generated by those. And there isn't like, okay, this is a good guy, this is a bad guy, they're all fucking bad because this is a prison. What's the premise? The premise is that having escaped from part two, it's Ripley, Newt, Hicks, and a partially destroyed or mostly destroyed android Bishop. They're on this fucking shuttle or whatever it is, and what ends up happening is that they land on a prison planet, Fury 161, and they're discovered by prisoners there, and guess what? It's what the trailer says. A visitor has come, but not alone. And so who's here? It's a fucking alien. But then there are a bunch of little other elements there, and you're trying to understand what's happening. But the characters, as you are learning, the characters are also learning. So there's already a deeper thing happening, and you see characters start to reveal things to each other but hold back. And then this is kind of like where you get to see some of the differences between the assembly cut and the theatrical cut. And I'm jumping, but I'll kind of hint at it before we actually go into that aspect, is that I actually prefer the theatrical cut over the assembly cut.
Really?
Yeah, because there's more spelled out for you in the assembly cut than in the theatrical cut, because the theatrical cut is like, it's like an hour 45 or something like that, and then the assembly cut is over 2 hours.
Yeah,
So
it's an hour 55 versus 2 hours 27.
Okay, so there has to be more. There's an economy with the theatrical cut, and because of there's that economy, you are led through the story in ways that kind of like, either you don't know and you figure it out later, or you have to make those connections based on what they cut to. Whereas in the assembly cut, there are more moments of like fully realized kind of explanation of what's happening. And I think that you lose kind of like suspense, or you lose impact, or you lose immediacy, or you lose stakes when someone is telling you something versus when you cut to it and you have to kind of like put that together. So all that being said, it's an interesting film. It's kind of, I went into it, for 2024, I'm trying to watch movies for the first time. Sometimes that works better than other times. And I think this time there was enough distance between myself and the last time I viewed the film, that I was able to do that. But now, after having watched two versions of it, and I don't know much about the details surrounding the production, but I know that the production was troubled, and I know that there was a lot of interference with Fincher, against Fincher. And my question going into it was, is it that bad? Or is it just that we've been told? Is it what we take from these horror stories of a production, or is the film actually that bad? I come out of it saying, well, the film is probably not what it could have been, but for what it is, it's what it is. And is it that the horror stories make it worse, or do they make it better? I don't know. What do you know about the production, the history, the background?
Well, the production is, this is weird because it's Aliens. Okay, so Aliens, 79. Aliens, 86. This film's 92. They wanted to push, they wanted to do a third film. It was money. It was
It's Godfather 3.
Exactly, well, to a degree. But here's the thing. It's like, at least with Godfather, you got Coppola directing the entire series. You got Coppola, right. Driving the bus. Here you have Ridley Scott, then you have James Cameron. There was talk of getting Ridley Scott back, but there were so many different ideas on what it could be. When shit wouldn't work out with Ridley Scott's schedule, Rennie Harlin was brought on. Now, if you know anything about Rennie Harlin, this is not a great visionary. He's a good action director. Did the second Die Hard film. He did The Adventures of Ford Fairlane with Andrew Dice Clay. He did Gina Davis in The Long Kiss Goodnight, which is a very underrated film, I think, but also did Cutthroat Island. Huh?
Is that with Samuel Jackson?
Samuel Jackson, David Morris, Brian Cox. It's a very entertaining, fun, good time with a really good performance by both Jackson and Gina Davis. But this guy is not to the level of a James Cameron or especially a Ridley Scott. He was a hired gun. His idea was to take the alien, either to go to the alien planet or have the aliens actually come to Earth. And if you look at the original sneak peek, which wasn't even, it was the egg opening up in the same way that, the egg opening up over a space background, the same as the second film was. Yeah. And the tagline was where, the first one in space, no one can hear you scream. The tagline was going to be, on Earth, everyone can hear you scream. And that got people excited because it was like, oh shit, they're going to bring it to Earth and we're going to see how it interacts with human beings and what that whole craziness is going to be. And then that was completely abandoned to this prison planet. Now, the really shitty thing about what 20th Century Fox was doing was that they needed a hit, and they knew that Alien 3 could be a huge money maker. They budgeted at like $45 million. It would go on to cost about $65 million, which is twice the amount of the combined, which is more than twice the amount of the combined budgets of the first two films. So this is a film that was fucking out of control. But this was a film that the original concept was that. Then they brought in a New Zealand director named Vincent Ward, who had this idea of a wooden planet, a wooden space station filled with monks who had turned their back on society and technology, and as in the Fincher film, the Solarco capsule crash lands there, killing both Hicks and Newt, Ripley being the survivor. And that proved to be problematic. Depending on who you talk to, there were people who loved the idea of it and the concepts. Geiler and Hill had problems with it because a lot of things could never be explained. Why is a planet wooden? Why would it be like this? What's the point of all this? It's like sometimes they're interesting ideas as far as a fictional story will go, but there's a practical aspect even in science fiction that prohibits something from being realized. We lost each other for a minute there, but what I was saying is that there were definitely interesting ideas. A space station, and it could look cool in space. This thing made of wood, but then there is also that idea of even if something is science fiction, there has to be some logic to it. And Geiler and Hill had problems with that. There was arguments going on. Ward left the project, and that's when David Fincher was brought in. First-time filmmaker, first-time feature-length filmmaker, having done, I think, probably most famous for that promo of the baby smoking. Remember?
Yeah.
The baby in utero smoking. So there was that. And you got to call that exactly what it is.
And Madonna videos, basically.
And the Madonna videos, yeah. I think you did not lose yourself. No, what was it? Not
express yourself.
Express yourself. Yeah, the one that kind of had a little bit of a Fritz Lang vibe to it, if I remember correctly. But and she's also dressed up as. What's that?
I think he did Vogue as well.
I think he did Vogue too, yeah. So, I mean, he had made a name for himself. He was a cameraman. He had worked at ILM. So this was a guy who had an understanding of the technology, and he had an understanding of what was going to be needed in order to make this thing fully realized. The problem with hiring somebody like David Fincher is that where you had a Vincent Ward or a Rennie Harlan who was going to take orders from the studio and going to do things in a certain way, even if they did leave the project, they were going to adhere to what the studio wanted. Fincher was more in lines of a fuck the studio kind of director, and his attitude was going to be, he had no problem shitting on 20th Century Fox in with every opportunity that he had, and there's a certain ego there that you can see in his later films, and especially the stories that you hear on The Social Network, and going shot after take after take after take in order to get exactly what he sometimes talking about 50 to 60 takes of something. So he's a problematic director as far as being amenable to the needs of a studio. And there's a part of me, the artist part of me, that says, well, fuck it. He's an artist. He needs to create what he can create, and he needs to be given the room. But there's also a factor in, this is not painting. This is not writing a book. There are limitations, and there are people involved in creating budgets for something like this. So there is a certain responsibility as a director to stay within the budget and create something within that realm. While at the same time, I think, there's a part of me that loves the bullshit of this story. There's a part of me that really loves the fuck 'em all attitude that Fincher brought to it. And he was not somebody that was corralled. And part of the problem with this film is that it has a signature look to it, but I think thematically is where the film starts to fall apart, because I think the ideas that he probably brought to it were scaled back and were no longer able to be truly achieved. Number one, there was no shooting script to go into this film. And number two, everything was being rewritten on the fly. So there were pages being faxed in and changes in the production that would negate everything that had been shot the day before. So you would have the actor saying, well, what we're shooting today basically gets rid of what we shot yesterday. So there was no, I think there was a difficulty in creating something that had a consistency to it. I think this is a beautiful film. I think it's an incredible film, but there are ideas there that don't get fully fleshed out. I don't think that the religious aspect of the film, which should have been, aside from the alien, the role of the alien and the survival aspect of the film, I think that the religious aspect of it should have been more deeply explored. I think it should have been something that it's only cursorily addressed. These men who have developed a society that is highly religious and a brotherhood. There's an element there that is not fully realized, and I think that's probably the biggest problem. Enough. Yes, it wasn't extreme enough, because it should have played out with more power and more conviction for whatever sins they were being,
right.
And it has
to replace everything about their old lives.
Yes,
to such a degree that it's like whatever. It's almost like there has to be a level. And I'm cutting you off.
No, go ahead, please.
Fucking riding your fucking horse, but I feel like for this kind of story, it's almost like an addiction. Mm-hmm. If you have an addiction, or if you know anyone who had like a certain type of lifestyle and they were really extreme, and then what they do is they have this, whether it is actually a come to Jesus moment or not, whatever that is, where they they abandon all of that other stuff, and then they shift to this new thing, and they become just as extreme with that new thing.
Yes.
And not just like a conversion type of moment, or even like a personal evolution, or this thing where it's like a David Bowie, where he goes through these different periods in his life and he keeps changing. Beyond that, I just mean like it's kind of like going from one extreme to the other extreme, but it's still the same type of like extreme. It's just with different clothes, a different costume, a different whatever. It's kind of like, I think there should have been that, and there should have been more consequences in terms of backsliding into the old life.
Yeah.
It's all very didn't really get to.
Yeah, it's all very exciting, but it's surface. There's a moment where these are prisoners on a prison planet. They've taken, I don't remember if they said Jesus Christ as their savior, but there is a religious salvation that is there. They've sworn themselves to celibacy, which is easy to do. Well, they could be fucking each other, but
but that's the thing. Yeah, sorry, but
no, you're right.
Sorry to jump in, but it's like that's the element is like, well, if you have a group of rapists.
Mm-hmm.
And all of those were the Heinz 57 of that, right?
Yeah. Interesting.
It's well, what can you put your attention on that's going to somehow deter and prevent you from, because religion is culture. So it's like, what's going to dictate your behavior, and what's going to stand in the way between you like changing and behaving in this certain cultural way versus behaving in the way that you did before. And so that has to be, well, these are the rules, and now these are the punishments. This is what is ordained, and this is what is forbidden. And if you transgress, then it's not only like, okay, in the afterlife, it's now, if they believe in an afterlife, which they do. But at this point, it's like, well, you have to keep your shit in check. It's most likely going to be a type of religious group that is going to renounce the physical world on some level, and renounce the body and the needs of the body. And so a lot of times maybe that also comes with like a rejection of pleasure, means some kind of like acceptance of hardship. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
It's what does that look like? So now when you have a rape scene or a would-be rape scene, what is the punishment? If you have men that are potentially going to either rape one another or have sex with one another, how do you address that culturally? How does that fit into like, well, this is an abomination? It's not like they're going to say, well, sex is beautiful, and man-on-man sex is acceptable as long as you have feelings, like emotional feelings for that person and affection, and as long as you cuddle after. No, it's going to be, well, if you do that, this is what happens to you after you die, and this is what happens to you now. So this is what it is, because these are also like, this is like a gang mentality that you're going to have in prison. And a gangster who, look at the Nation of Islam, or the 20th century new religious movement that was a heterodox sect based on certain elements of mainstream Islam. Very strict, very militant. So you're going to have elements of that. Go on.
No, please. I'm listening. I'm because this is definitely your field. This is definitely something that you've studied. You understand this a hell of a lot better. I understand it in a more abstract way, where it's just where my own personal opinions on religion. And I watch a movie like this and I look at these men and I say, we can, it's the embracing of religion as a cultural understanding in this film, I think is very realistic. I think it's very people do people do adopt that because it's a sense of creating purpose. It's a sense of making sense out of that which we don't understand. I definitely have my own opinions on religion, and they're contrary to this, and I can't really be shifted from that. But I can try to empathize, and this is what's great about movies is that you can empathize and try to understand why somebody acts in a way they do. And I think they have the perfect mouthpiece in Charles Dutton in this film, who I think is incredible, very believable, very,
Yes.
even if you didn't know Dutton's background, even if you didn't know about his history,
What
there
is
is,
that history?
oh, Dutton was in prison for a number of years for murder. Dutton committed murder in his not in his youth, but in his young life, and he went to prison. I don't know. I don't know the complete story of how he was able to get out, or maybe it was self defense, or I don't know exactly what it was. But he murdered somebody. He went to prison. Um, I don't know what his religious. I don't know what his come to Jesus moment was in prison, or if that was what it was. But he did come out and he became an actor and he rose to great stardom. I mean, there was a moment there where he was just. Dutton has been one of those character actors that when he turns up in a film, you say to yourself, well, at least I'm going to watch this guy. This guy's going to be great. And this is around the time that he was starring in his own sitcom on Fox called Rock, which
Rock.
really
That, yeah.
one of the best things, one of the best, most underrated sitcoms on television, especially during that time, especially near that end of the Fox television run before they became respectable. Because if you remember
Right.
Fox back
Oh
in the
yeah.
day was Married with Children. It was In Living Color.
Simpsons,
It was The Simpsons
Cops.
and Cops. Yeah, so it was a lot of lowbrow shit. Some of it very good, some of it just questionable. But and they did what a lot of upstart television networks do. I'm talking about the WB and the C, whatever the other one was,
CW.
the CW. Yeah, they they courted a black audience, built their networks on that, and then abandoned them later. So Fox built a great deal of their audience on a black audience, and then abandoned them. WB picked that ball up. The CW picked that ball up. And then, if I remember correctly, the CW and the WB would combine. But Rock was one of those shows that they created, which was constantly at war with the network because the network wanted a good time. If I remember correctly, and what I've read about it, the network wanted a good times with a JJ like character that emphasized buffoonery, and Rock was never like that.
No.
Rock was something that had integrity, that it was slice of life, and it was people. It was real people dealing with real issues. They were black.
And and
And that was the thing.
and Charles, and I don't even know if this is I'm gonna fucking promote. Go back
Hmm.
into the. I'm gonna remind everyone, and many people probably don't know. In 2018, we did a history of television.
Yeah.
Then, yeah, 2018, we did basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We did 10 episodes
Hmm.
in 2018. So the 90s one specifically are episodes 186, 187, 188. Go to the Lipson archives if you're interested. Um, but from basically 180 to 193. I mean, we threw in the Anthony Bourdain death episode, but we did TV, and we just do a rundown of. Obviously, we didn't cover every TV show, but we just I would throw titles at Rick, and we would just go back and forth talking about them, move on, and it's a series that I think we're both very proud of. Go back if you want to get into the vibe of like television, and we talk a lot about Fox.
Oh yeah, there was a lot to say there.
But Charles S. Dutton, I mean, like he's the kind of person. His delivery, his gravitas,
exactly.
It's like he's the kind of person who could forget like a Coach movie where he gets the football team to make it. I'm talking about Henry V level, fucking once more onto the breach, dear friends, once more. Like he could get troops, he could rally troops, and everything that he speaks with a certain level of conviction that you're like, well, this motherfucker like means it. Charles S. Dutton is believable. It's like, and every line he's ever said has been believable, and he's in. I think he's in Get on the Bus.
He's great on Get on the Bus.
That Spike Lee movie about the Million Man March. He's in Menace to Society, right?
Yeah.
Every time he calls a younger guy, like young brother, young blood, whatever, he tells him, you know that he's going to give you this fucking wisdom, and he's not bullshitting. You know that he's lived it.
Yeah.
And so if you hear that this actor, whatever character he's playing, but this actor actually fucking like did time, and now he's here like doing this, you get a sense that not only has he been there, but he learned the lessons that you're supposed to learn. He did his penance in the penitentiary, and now he's fucking like preaching, but he earned it. That I think is a great missed opportunity for the film in terms of the religious aspect of it,
yeah.
and also a sense of kind of what are the implications of the arrival of this woman. What are the implications to a religious sect in a prison that's basically just kind of like abandoned, a prison of men, where now you have a woman who, spoiler fucking alert, is pregnant with a fucking alien. Like, there's too much there that even in that world, in that universe, like, that they would bleed over from our reality here, for that to not be, like, further explored, and for there to not be a deeper kind of impact in terms of, like,
yeah,
what does this mean, and what is this a sign of? This means something, that this woman comes to us. Not just that we have to stick to our fucking vow. Man, maybe it is. Maybe now we're speculating and we're doing all this shit, but it's like there's also an opportunity for these people. Some of them are just criminals. Probably some of them are just going along to get along with the cultural aspect of it. But there are going to be believers. There are going to be hardcore believers who are going to be interpreting. And what happens if one person is like, she is a threat to our way of life, she's a temptation, she's whatever, whereas another person is going to say, this means, this is a sign. How do you not see this as a sign? So there's a lot of stuff there that kind of wasn't touched on. I think you're right. And you don't get a sense of, you get a sense of, okay, these guys are in prison and they have this like set of beliefs, but the story kind of like uses the beliefs as kind of this overlayer versus something that is deeper, something that really dictates not what they do, but what they don't do. And I think that anytime you get a religious group, especially like a kind of a new religious movement type group, it's going to be really held on to in a way that's much more dynamic and fanatical than some like old religion that someone's bought into, that it's just kind of like, well, yeah, this is how I was raised, versus like, no, this is my fucking thing. You know, I've been part of this shit for fucking 3 months. God damn it. You know what I mean? Like sometimes the conviction of a newbie is so much stronger than that of a fucking lifer. You know,
Yeah.
When it comes to that, versus the conviction of a lifer in prison versus the conviction of a newbie in prison. If that makes sense. So yes, I agree with you on that, and I think it. This is kind of like, to me, this kind of leads me into like, and I don't know if you were going to say more on that, or if you were ready to jump on to your own another point in your own thoughts.
No, I was just going to finish that out, let it peter out, you know?
I look at this, I was looking at these in terms of, you know, going back to, and this connects with the TV thing. I looked at these things as kind of like each representative of their own decade. At this point, we're on the third film. Alien, the original 1979, really has this theme of distrust for authority. And I mean, the times were perfect for that. It expresses that, to have this idea of Nixon and Watergate, a Ridley Scott, whether it's something that is actually like he injected into the film or it's just happened to be there. But in England, it's in 78 and 79, they were calling it, going back to Shakespeare, they were calling it the Winter of Discontent, which is a twist on Richard III's speech about the summer. But you had massive strikes. There were bodies that were not buried. There was trash collected that was like piling up into the streets. Anytime you watch or read about punk in New York, where it started, you hear about how fucked up New York was in the 70s, and how the buildings were all fucked up, and you had all these like crumbling buildings. And then you look at in England, where it was taken up, and you had like fucked up shit going on over there. And then you had like, once you had Reagan over here, and then you had Thatcher over there, and like this kind of, you know, going from the 70s into the 80s, and a distrust of government, class war. And you get that with Alien. You get the crew below deck versus the corporate interests above. You mix that with Ridley Scott's 1980s kind of futurism. You get Blade Runner. You have the Weyland-Yutani Tyrell. Asia is on the rise in terms of like corporate technological kind of horizons there. Mix that with 70s auteur artistic visions that Ridley Scott's getting from Jodorowsky's failed project, Giger, to a certain extent, like the auteur kind of science fiction of Kubrick, the 1980s tech obsession. You get Alien. You get something dark, artistic, visionary, beautiful, cynical, thrilling. You jump to Aliens 1986, and you have kind of, on the one hand, this idea of like, well, kick ass, man, versus like a for the money Gordon Gekko ethos. Greed is good. And everything is big, it's bold, it's Schwarzenegger, Stallone, WWF at the time. Not WWE, it's WWE, World Wrestling Federation. You get these Vietnam films that we talked about. You have Top Gun, The Need for Speed, High Fives. James Cameron, with Terminator. It's James Cameron and Oliver Stone are basically like side by side, kind of on that end. And so if you look at these two films and you look at like the cultural milieu, it makes sense. Now, if you go to 92, if I personally think of, well, as a latchkey generational person, I can relate to this fucking Left Behind prison fucking planet thing. I can see this idea of not only alien but alienation. Even this aspect of like in that period, the idea of like a battle of the sexes was also like on the forefront. Ideas of Anita Hill the year before, sexual harassment at work, Lewinsky was on the horizon. You had the Riot Girls in Olympia, Washington, which was like the sister of the grunge movement or whatever. You had Thelma and Louise, which goes back to Ridley Scott. You had Bitch magazine. This cinema moment of her shaving her head is a precursor to G.I. Jane.
Yeah. Also Ridley Scott.
Exactly. You have Terminator 2 with Linda Hamilton, being like the bad bitch of that. Camille Paglia's Sexual Personae, which is a battle of the sexes and nature as a monster. And it was controversial. You have Ripley's place among bad boys without the dyke stereotype of the second film, where in this film she is sexual. She chooses to be sexual. She's straight up. Are you attracted to me? I've been out here for a long time. You have the abortion conversation. It was only a few years before that we talked about with Freddy Krueger that I think it's in the fifth one, it's Dream Child, where you get the idea of like, now there's the baby being, right? Here you have it too. And so this is Clinton elected in 92, and the abortion is very much on the table also. Mix that with Fincher's, what will be his themes of masculine cult-like groups, Fight Club, which will come later on in the decade. Fight Club, the book, comes out at the same time. I think it's the same year that the Lilith Fair comes out in the 90s, which was like this like girl festival of music, girl power and all that. And then, Fight Club comes at the end of the decade. Look at the religion mixed with violence of Southern. Now throw in the 90s millenarian end of the world religious aspect. I've talked about this a lot. Like the 90s, there was a preoccupation with the end of the world, the end of the century, the end of the millennium, all that shit. That's when you get Waco. The following year was Waco. And in the wake of Waco, you get Oklahoma City. And that inspires Alex Jones to start up in the 90s. And later on, he's going to push right through 9/11 and fucking get hit real big up until he becomes a Trump supporter. But his whole, all that makes sense. The angry guy, and one of his websites is prisonplanet.com. So, I mean, I don't know if he thinks he's the Charles S. Dutton of angry, disenfranchised, paranoid preppers. But there is some kind of tie-in there that makes complete sense, at least to me. The barcodes on the head. I mean, in the 90s, people were talking about, the mark of the beast, looking at Revelation, when is the end of the world, looking at Nostradamus, and they were like, well, the barcode is that's the mark of the beast, and it's going to be on your hand or on your head. A preoccupation with angels, devils, and aliens in the 90s, X-Files, Alien Autopsy. So for all of its like problems, to me, it's like, I mean, that doesn't affect my views of the outcome of the film. I still think that the film is, as a film, more interesting with more potential than the second one. The way the second one beats it is that the second one they pulled it off, and James Cameron did what he did. But in terms of the grittiness, the mix of hopeful versus hopeless, the kind of the metaphor of "fuck you, dad," fucking "fuck you, mom," that Fincher was doing to his parents, his metaphorical parents at the studio, it's kind of like, of course. The idea of like, let me dance with corporate while also flipping corporate off. Like, this is the music business in the 90s. This is all of it. And it's also a metaphor for kind of the characters in the film also, to include Ripley, where, you know, here's an old face that comes back out of her past, fucking Bishop too. Trust me. Come on. He's almost like a father figure to her.
Yeah.
And she's just like, nah. So this is definitely a mixed bag. But it is definitely a 90s, a 90s film. And it makes sense to me as a 90s film. Although getting into the cuts from assembly or theatrical, do you remember stuff about the theatrical, or now having seen this one, this is just like what you have in your mind?
Okay, repeat that question.
Do you remember any other moments from having seen it before that you like, that made you have conflict about, like, I thought I remember this from it, having now just seen the assembly cut? Like, did it just wipe out any memory that you had before, and this is all you remember, or were there things that you remember that you didn't see here?
Well, I originally, I've seen the theatrical cut because I saw it in the theater, and then the times that I've seen it since have all been the assembly cut, including an original Alien box set where it was very much what do you call it? It wasn't cleaned up the way it is in this film. It was like they were incorporating video footage because they didn't have a proper negative, in the same way that they did with Exorcist 3. Remember? You remember how some of it looks like a normal film, and then they have spliced in video. Right? Yeah, William Peter Blatty's version of the film.
Yeah, but some of that footage was with
Brad Dourif.
Brad Dourif, yeah.
That's right. Some of the footage was with Brad Dourif. So it changes that movie. This one, I'm watching the quadrology as it's seamless. It's seamless. But the major differences are, number one, the chest burster in this film.
Right.
It originally came out of a Rottweiler. In the assembly, it comes out of a dead ox.
Yeah.
They don't explain Golic, the character, the Renfield character, going back to the if I remember correctly, in the theatrical cut, he just disappears. I think it's assumed that he's killed. I don't remember if in the original theatrical cut they don't capture the creature in that
holding.
Yeah.
Basically, it's a maze, a chase, then they trap it, and then they pour lead on it in theatrical.
No. The lead comes later. That's a different scene. That's the final scene. But in the original scene where they capture it in the middle of the movie, and then the Golic.
No. You're talking about the assembly cut. I'm talking about the theatrical cut.
Well, the theatrical cut doesn't include that, right? Or Now I got to watch the
So
theatrical cut.
so in the theatrical, we're probably saying the same thing,
Yeah.
but like in different orders, as these two versions exist.
Uh-huh.
So in the theatrical cut, the idea is that it's okay. In going back to, let's go between the dog and the ox.
Yeah.
So there are these two parallel versions of this movie. So originally, when you first see it in the assembly cut, you get more like establishing shots of the planet, and you get Charles Dance's character, and then I want to get into the cast too, but you get Charles Dance's character walking, and it looks beautiful. It looks like darkly stylized. It looks like it kind of looks like what Dune wants to be, the newest Dune.
The what? The what?
What Villeneuve's Dune?
Oh, yeah.
It looks like kind of like what it wants to do with the costumes and the billowing, and
yeah.
And it looks almost like there's a fashion designer that I like. His name is Rick Owens. Some of those shots look like they could have inspired Rick Owens' pandemic era fucking runway shows. His like apocalyptic runway shows or whatever.
Yeah.
Post-apocalyptic, whatever. Not in the religious sense, obviously, but I mean it in terms of pop cultural, as we use post-apocalyptic. Anyway, so you get those kind of shots, beautiful. Then you have in a theatrical, you get back to there are shots back of that the pod, or what is it called? It's the
chamber, the sleep chamber that she's in.
Well, what is the
the
vehicle
sulaco
called?
The sulaco.
Yeah, the sulaco. You see a Rottweiler barking, and then you see a face hugger, and then so now you understand that that's what's going to happen. And later on, there's a scene where the dog's owner is looking for the dog, and the dog has like these lacerations on its face. Then later, during the funeral rites of Hicks and Newt, after Ripley wants an autopsy done on Newt to find out if she's been like
infested,
and or inseminated with this alien, which actually is interesting because it's actually her, but she doesn't know it yet. You have this right, and Charles S. Dutton is talking about there's like flower symbolism and life symbolism, and as that's happening, it's cutting between that funeral and the birth or the emergence of this fucking chest burster from the dog. And it's fucked up. And now if you compare that to the ox, it's a dead ox. Well, there are shots of oxen earlier, and I like the symbolism of the idea of like this beast of burden and these prisoners, you know what I mean? And the ox with the yoke and all that. But to have the alien come out of a dead ox is not the same as, anytime you have, and you've talked about this, you yourself have talked about this multiple times, anything with a dog on screen, it will fuck you up.
Yeah.
And so to have a dog be the victim of this, it just gets you on another level that
sure.
So that I think the theatrical wins in terms of that because it's just that much more fucked up and powerful.
Well, I think. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No. I wanted you to finish because what I'm going to say. We'll get to that. Go ahead. What were you going to finish with?
I was just going to move on to the next point, which is the maze part, which is how we started with this portion of the conversation. I don't know if this.
No, continue, please.
Okay, so now this thing is on the loose, and people are trying to figure out what's happening. Pretty soon, people are going to start to die because the dog's owner is going to die, and all this. And Charles Dance has now he's kind of he's stuck his neck out for Ripley because he's done the autopsy without authority, or without authorization.
Mm-hmm.
He's done the autopsy on Newt. So he wants to know, what does she know, and she wants to know more about his background, and they're going back and forth. Ultimately, he gets killed. They're building this relationship. There's all this other stuff happening, which is already more complex in terms of the plot than the second one. This is part of what I'm talking about. But the differences are that once he dies, in the theatrical cut, the idea is that they hatch this plan to lead the alien through this maze, close the doors to kind of guide it into this one area where it will be trapped, and from there they're going to pour molten lead on the alien. In the assembly cut, it's that part comes later, and in an earlier portion, they come face to face with the alien, but someone like runs in and the alien follows him.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they trap the alien.
Yeah. That's what I was talking about, yeah.
Yeah. And then the Renfield, this Gallic character who describes the alien as a dragon, he wanders in this Renfield moment. He wanders to where the alien is, and he releases it, goes in, gets killed, and now the alien is out. And then now in that version, they're gonna trap it. They're gonna go to the maze part,
mm-hmm.
and then they do the lead. So those are the differences.
Well, the final main difference, though, is that in the theatrical cut, and this is the way I remember it, it's not the same in the assembly. When Ripley dies by leaping backwards into
the main one.
Yeah, what the theatrical cut, and I think this was Geiler and Hill's contribution, as she's falling to her death, the queen bursts out of her chest.
Yeah.
Ripley grabs a hold of it and takes it down with her.
Yeah.
They don't do that in the assembly. I think
No.
Fincher toyed with that idea, but I think ultimately he felt it was a little bit too silly. Dramatically, I think it works as far as the theatrical, where it leaps out. But I can't help feel that it's kind of silly. That it leaps out of her in that last moment, and she manages to grab a hold of it as it has burst through her chest.
Yeah,
it's good. It stretches logic, is what I'm saying.
It does.
Well,
I mean, so at the end, they do lure it into that area.
Mm-hmm.
Charles S. Dutton fights it. She wants to be killed because earlier she's seen a scan where she has recognized that she has a queen inside of her. So
but she's not just saying that she wants to die because she wants to kill this thing. She's saying it because she knows how it ends for her. She has seen this. She has watched it leap out of Cain. She has watched it leap out of. She knows that it can't be good for her. In one of the scripts. Well, Sigourney Weaver also wanted to die too because she figured that she had done enough with the character. But, when a payday comes along, there is always a way to revive it and bring her back for the fourth film. But that's something we'll get into next week. In this particular one, she wanted to die in this film. It's a hero's death. It's a martyr's death. And I don't know of anything that could be more martyrish than to fly backwards, arms outstretched into molten lava. So she does that, and it's a powerful moment because it's something, you have followed this character, you have come to know this character, love this character, you've watched her growth, you've watched her become change from one thing into something completely different, and the sacrifice that she's making is really powerful because yes, you know that she's ultimately going to die because she can't survive this thing, but it's hard to watch her do this. You if you've watched these films with any level of investment, you do so with that understanding at the end that when she dies, it's an emotional thing. One Fox wanted to rewrite the script so that she would survive this, that they would extricate the queen from her chest, and that it would embody whoever took it out of her, and then you would have that ending. You would have but it was ridiculous. So I like the way this ends. I like the way it ends in the assembly cut. Now, what I wanted to say about the assembly cut was simply this: is that there's a reason it's the assembly cut and it's not the director's cut, because Fincher disavowed this film. And it's not just the anger that he had over the experience that says that this is not a director's cut. Fincher argues that in order for there to be a definitive director's cut, you would have to go back, burn the negative, and start all over with something that he wanted, which is to say that due to studio interference and the lack of preparation or the changes that were constantly being made, the film went in a completely different direction than what he originally intended. Thus, there is no director's cut. There is no possibility with the footage that is available that was shot for there to be something that spoke to his original vision. I find that incredibly interesting, and I find it powerful that either he had the balls to say it, or he has established himself as one of the great filmmakers of the late 20th century, that he could come out and say this shit about a major studio like 20th Century Fox and not suffer repercussions because of it.
Yeah, that is that's interesting, and it's interesting that he's never softened on that, right?
He's never softened on it. He's doubled down in some cases, but he's also eased up on the fact of recognizing that he was a younger filmmaker at the time, and that there were ways that he would have handled it differently. Not in the sense that he feels bad about what he did, but that there would have been a better means to an end. There would have been a better end to his means. He could have manipulated. I think he understands now, at almost 55 or however old he is now, compared to the 28, 29-year-old man who directed this first film, that he could have been more diplomatic in a way that would have achieved his goals to a greater degree. But and like I said at the beginning of this podcast, a great deal of this is his fault because he went into it without a prepared script. You can't blame anybody else for that. And anybody who's listening would say, well, he had an opportunity. Yeah, but if you have an opportunity and you know what your ideas are and you know what you need to achieve and what you know what budget that you need, you know what kind of requirements are going to be necessary to achieve this vision, you don't go into it half-ass. So the great directors who have done this, Fincher, Gilliam with Munchausen, von Stroheim with any number of his aborted efforts, even Buster Keaton in his transfer to the MGM Studios. If you don't have the autonomy necessary to make the movie that you want to make, then you shouldn't be making that film.
So
at least with that.
No, go ahead.
At least with Seven and Fight Club, he had the backing of a major star that Brad Pitt could say, I signed up for the head in the box movie. I didn't sign up to save the woman. I didn't sign
Right.
up to save the wife. And there's power in that. Sigourney Weaver, I don't know if they weren't even sure if they wanted to bring her back. This is how fucking ridiculous it is. They wanted to build a female audience, but even in Aliens, they didn't get women in. Women didn't go see the film. It didn't matter that men went en masse to see this film, and part of the appeal was seeing a badass woman character go at it in that way. That film would not have been the same with a man fighting that alien. I
Or
believe,
this one.
yeah, or this one, or the first one. I
Yeah,
believe
I mean,
one of
yes.
the greatest aspects of the film is that it's a female protagonist. It catches you off guard. It throws the whole genre upside down, and it gives you something that you're not prepared for. To imagine that you could do this film with just a male character, I think it's insulting, and it wouldn't have been as successful. Part of what makes this a great film, or part of what makes this a great character, is that it's a woman, and it subverts expectations. So that's my attitude on
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
I mean, look at that famous shot of them face to face.
Yeah.
You have
Which is
the
a shot
alien right.
which is a shot that the studio did not want. Fincher grabbed Sigourney Weaver, grabbed the head, and grabbed the camera, and he shot that. They didn't want to let him shoot that for whatever reason, because they were cutting back shit all the time. That
Yeah.
that is probably the most iconic image of the entire series.
Yeah.
Her bald head, eyes shut, and that thing staring at her in the face. I remember seeing that in the preview, asking myself, what the fuck are they going to do with that? How do you get out of that,
Yeah.
you know?
How do you get out of that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the reason is it's not going to kill her because she has a queen inside
That's
of her.
right. It's self-preservation. It understands that. It's, for a creature that doesn't speak, that you can't see eyes, that you can't see into its soul, I never felt that the alien was just a dumb animal. I knew, and that's one of the things that the fourth film does get right, is that you start to understand. That's the first in the series where you start to understand there is a real intelligence going on there. That's the only. I haven't seen the fourth film in years. I'm interested in watching it, but I think that's the only thing that I remember from it that is a jumping off point that I'm excited about talking about.
It'll be interesting.
It will be.
And going back to, for me, the chest bursting final moment. Yes, there is a kind of silliness to it. Like, she's falling back into this lava basically, and the thing jumps out of her chest as she's falling back. It like emerges.
Yeah.
And she grabs it, and on the one hand she's holding it so that it doesn't escape, but on the other hand she grabs it and kind of nestles it against her torn open chest, the way a mother would with a child.
Yeah.
And that, as kind of, fake as that looks, the assembly cut looks fake too.
Yeah.
And so that moment is just that much more powerful to me. Just the symbolism of it, the iconography of it, the woman and child, right? In this sense, we don't know exactly how she became inseminated with this queen inside her. But we know that at this point, it's almost like a virgin birth. And it's a fucking miracle from hell, and for her to hold it to her torn open chest, and die with it. The bond that they have at that point, the bond that she has with, it's all come full circle where it's like, you bitch, but it's last time she fought the fucking queen. This time she's the fucking mother of the queen. That's there's a lot there. She lost Newt. She's lost her daughter in the backstory of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then she has an adopted daughter who's she's lost. Who she's the one who wanted that symbolic daughter torn open in death just to make sure she didn't have one inside her. She's the one who has one inside her. She ends up suffering the same fate as the members of her crew from the first one, or at least the Harry Dean the John Hurt character, yeah. And now, had this been just a trilogy, I mean, what a way to end it! Yeah. That it all happens again. I think there is a logic to it. There's a symbolism to it. The look of it, the idea is it's silly, sure, but I mean, how much of it is already fucking silly if you kind of take a step back? But I think that plus, the bringing the Lance Hendrickson character. Before we wrap up, let's talk about this cast. We talked about
Dutton and Ripley. Charles's dance, I think, is wonderful in it. And it was a battle between producers. I think Fincher wanted Richard E. Gant, who you know him from Richard E. Grant, With Nail and I, fantastic actor. But I think David Giler and Walter Hill felt he was too soft for a Prison Planet, and I think they would have probably been correct. Charles Dance really. He brings a more quiet gravitas to the film as opposed to Charles Dutton's overpowering. Like you would follow Charles Dutton into battle. Charles Dance, you would want advising you. There was a quiet kind of tenderness and intelligence in his character that makes you really invest in him. So when his death comes, it's palpable. It's a very strong moment, and it's hard to watch yet another person that Ripley cares about being ripped from her. Yeah.
And he's so interesting. Like he's one of the most interesting characters in the whole series. For that intelligence, for that kind of like that playfulness that he has with her, the attraction, and most people, if you haven't seen this from before, you're going to know him from Game of Thrones. He's Tywin Lannister, and for me, it was kind of like oh shit, that's right, it's him, because it's like. Tywin Lannister was such a fucked up character, but he brought a level of there was a level of empathy where it's like my fucking stupid children, my worthless fucking children, and I'm the one who has to keep this thing together, because I have my legacy, and maybe you think we're evil, but this is my fucking family too, and this is our shit. And that's how he played it. And so to see him in this, it's cool to go back and see him in that light. Lance Henriksen, to see him return, it was a little... It was. I had mixed feelings about the direction, because it seemed so obvious that he was fucking not to be trusted.
In this film, yeah. But wouldn't the company do something like that? Wouldn't they send something that, well, I don't know.
No,
How much could they have known that there was a trust there? Now we are. Yeah.
the collect call from my prison planet fucking dropped. So
Happens.
the idea of trust me, Ripley, trust me, I'm not going to kill you.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to kill you. It was just a little bit too. It's like, who's going to believe you?
Well, it's obvious, and it's on the nose obvious, because that's what the company would do. The company would send something that they felt that she was more comfortable with, something that she recognized. Story-wise, how would they know how close she came to Bishop, and how? I mean, I guess they would have read his files, or I don't know. You can make that leap.
I'm just talking.
For us as an audience, it's bullshit.
Well,
But
I'm not
story-wise,
talking
wouldn't
about
it?
that. I'm not talking about the idea of sending him. I'm talking about the way that you tell your actor to play the scene is what got me. So it's like, the way that, and I think that's the direction. I don't think, because he could have taken it in that route, and Fincher would have said, like, hey, look, like, she's not going to fucking believe you. You need to lie to her in a way that she's going to believe you. Like, don't play it fucking menacingly, which I think he did.
Yeah.
And for it being menacing, it's kind of like, there was no moment in which she was going to, like, have that doubt, to me, to be like,
I understand.
Really question, like, can I believe him? No, because it was like, well, who the fuck is going to believe that? Like you don't trust him from the minute that you see him, and there's never any like doubt about his fucking intentions. So to me, that was a weak moment. But I like Lance Henderson and everything he does. I just blame Fincher on that.
Yeah. Well, who knows what? Who knows who's to blame there? At that point, I
mean, that's the direction. That's you're telling me. Was it a producer that went in and said, like, no, I want you to act this way? Like, was it Walter Hill that went in there and said that?
The statement that I'm saying is that I don't know how much of this film is. The look is definitely Fincher, and a lot of the ideas are Fincher, but I don't know how involved he was with the reshoots. They reshot a great deal of this film. The film,
I see.
You know what I mean? Where it's like, maybe it could be
a
different director. Maybe it could be stuff that was inserted. Fincher walked away. Fincher was fired a couple of times. Fincher quit a couple of times. This film...
Yeah, this is like his Island of Dr. Moreau.
Oh, yeah. For this film to be as good as it is a testament to his talent as a filmmaker. Because it's editing. It's just it comes together. But like I said earlier, it's a very basic story, and I think if Fincher had been given free rein to do what he wanted, we would have seen greater development in the religious aspect of it. We would have seen greater development in Ripley's struggle with what was going on with her, with this thing inside of her. It would have sold the idea better. But I don't know what was Fincher, what was reshoots, what was canceled ideas, what was left hanging. It's very difficult to say. This is a very problematic film, and I don't want to give too much credit or give too much fault in either direction. I mean, ultimately, it's the studio that's the problem here, but also I think it's the ego of youth with Fincher, thinking that he could get away with. To imagine that you're just going to walk into a franchise and be able to do it the way you want, I think that was very naive of him.
Yeah.
I think it was very short-sighted, and I think he should have... Whereas James Cameron faced incredible difficulties, especially with the British crew in trying to, because of the level of disrespect that they had for him after working for Sir Ridley Scott. But then Ridley Scott coming out of commercials to direct this film and nobody believing in what this is a series that's almost constantly plagued by expectations and lack of faith in the directors that are hired for the project. It's really amazing that the films are as good as they are. With Ridley Scott's film being a masterpiece, James Cameron's film being a great time, and this film being the beautiful and missed opportunity that it is. But I will say this much: I do love the film. I have a great time watching it. And now, because of your assessment of it, I think I'm going to have to go back and watch the theatrical cut to gain a little bit of perspective on it. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I think you're right. You have a different angle on it.
It's a different fucking movie.
It's a completely different movie, yeah.
So it's kind of like there is no right thing because there's no right fucking film.
Yeah, but there's no director's cut. There is no real vision here. It's warped. It's compromised. It's very difficult. This is a very difficult film, and it's probably the most difficult film ever released by a major studio. And I put that the majority of the fault on the studio for not having enough faith in the talent that they hire. Interesting talk.
Yeah.
Interesting talk.
Yep.
So, what do you want to say in closing out?
This episode goes to Cornelius Burrows. Thank you, Mr. Burrows, once again.
Very long time friend of the show. Who's been with us since the early days when it was before me and Lee, when it was Popcorn Mafia with Felicia, Felicia Michaels and Joey Diaz doing guest spots on that. This guy has been with us a long fucking time. So my heart goes out. My heart of thanks goes out.
Pretty soon we got one for you. Don't forget. buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos. buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos. Buy a coffee, tell a friend, tune in, and watch this.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back next week with Alien Resurrection.